I give you a conversation with one of the main partners in Big Picture World Group that formed Project Rise Partners, four-time Tony winner. You know, in order to win an EGOT, you got to win Tonys. Bruce D. Long, producer of many, many successful plays, specifically Memphis the Musical, which won the Tony for Best Musical. Bruce was one of my main partners, along with David Womark, in working to acquire Paramount. Still is, but it's a lot bigger than Paramount now. Okay, cool. Good. We didn't need that long-winded intro for me anyways. Um, so Bruce, man, floor is yours. This is finally time to talk about Broadway and theater
Yeah.
and the greatness that you come from. Which thank you, by the way, from me to you. We've never really gotten one-on-one either in this manner. Thank you, man, for everything that you've done to put me at the level next to you that you're at on stage and have just worked vice versa to build all of this in the way you have, man. You've been quite the wise man, and I'm very grateful for you. So thank you, sir. I want to acknowledge that publicly, one
Yeah, I
on one.
appreciate that. I appreciate that. So I think there's a couple of real opportunities to mesh both a kind of a nonprofit and a for-profit, two separate entities, nonprofit and for-profit, to kind of streamline some of what goes into bringing, a new play or musical to a commercial stage, whether that's Broadway or West End or, commercial tour. So I've put some of those thoughts together. I put those together in a book um, called The Problem with the Diet, which you can pick up on Amazon.com or from the publisher's website, Whiff and Stock. But out of that book, I've kind of distilled it down basically to a pretty reasonable business plan. I think the first thing is to really discuss what kind of moves me, what I'm passionate about, and that's stories that are good, beautiful, and true. These three words have been tossed around, so it's nothing new. But what I do think that I've done is I've been able to kind of quantify a little bit about what good, beautiful, and true really means. But in essence, these types of stories resonate with global audiences. And so we're at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is create a reasonable return on investment through global exploitation of new theatrical stories. Um, while at the same time establishing a nonprofit that cares for working artists. I think that's the big secret.
Yep.
So you take you take this idea that the best stories are those that foster the good, the beautiful, and the true in audiences, and then you create or curate a portfolio of stories that really kind of tell the truth of the human condition. And we can do that, I think, strategically, and from a business standpoint, I think we can do that with three kind of simple steps, if you will. I'm putting simple in air quotes. I think the first component of that is that we have to control our developmental pipeline to the commercial market. And we do that by creating a chain of regional theater companies. This would be nonprofit organizations. And this allows us kind of to decrease our costs because we can take one show, put it up, move it to the next theater, and all of the front money and the labor intensive capacity of actually creating a show for the stage is absorbed. And then you just move that show from theater to theater. So not only does this decrease our costs, but because we become our own gatekeepers, in other words, we're not dependent on a third party theater company, regional theater company out there to tell us whether we can be part of their season or not. We we are our own gatekeepers, and so consequently we increase our speed to market. And that's part of the one of the inherent challenges of Broadway is it takes forever to get a project
Yeah.
through that developmental pipeline. So speed to market by
What
controlling
is
our own
what
pipeline.
is? Let me ask you, what is the average like time that it takes per Broadway usually?
You
Just
know,
because
um,
Because I have
Many
the count.
stories, yeah,
Sorry, I was gonna say
yeah.
because the counteraction to that is your new model. I want to see the difference between normal. What is the normal time?
So by time you from start to finish, meaning from maybe commission or discovery of a brand new piece all the way up to an actual premiere on Broadway, it could be close to a decade.
Yeah.
And part of that is because most of theater artists are, employed by the gig. So there is some scheduling inherent, but I find that most of that is, you know, the big successful regional theater companies are booked out 2 and 3 seasons in advance. So if I were to find a project, and I feel like I've been really good at identifying projects that have gone through some level of development, but need maybe one more step. If I find a project like that, then I still have to wait 2 or 3 seasons before a slot even opens up.
Wow.
And then after that, you start negotiating either with Broadway or with a subsequent theater while you wait on a Broadway theater to come open. So if we control our own chain of regional theaters, then we can slot that in tomorrow, right? I mean,
Yeah.
figuratively speaking, we
Literally.
find a project today, we can slot it in tomorrow, and we kind of just control our destiny there.
Let
So I
me let
think,
me ask you something on that. Would you be able, so say we had, because we do, all these hotel locations, right? Like Sam Harris's ranch in Houston. Would we be able to implement what you're talking about in each one of these locations to create that regional chain that we would basically oversee?
yeah, absolutely. I think as long as the land or the space, the actual building
Yeah.
either has the land to put up a regional theater, build a physical space, or can convert something
Yeah.
into a space that is kind of commensurate. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter from one place to the other, but it needs to be, it needs to have the horsepower, if you will, on the technology side, but also
Yep.
the stage space to bring in that type of show. But yes, in theory, that would be ideal. That's the
Awesome.
way we create, a theater. I'll use examples of names you've used, but we'll set up
Yeah.
create a regional theater here in Charlotte, one down in Florida, one in
Yep.
Houston, one on the West Coast,
Yep.
and maybe somewhere else in the Midwest. And if we got really fortunate, we could try to find or build a new Broadway theater, which is incredibly aggressive because that's just that feels to me like a really big deal. But the point is, we could put this on a pre-Broadway tour, or that is our developmental pipeline, and a show might open in Charlotte first, and then it needs more work, so it goes to Houston or wherever. Or the show might be better for a Houston audience. So you put that up there first, and then if it needs more work, we have other theaters we can take it to after that. Because regional theater premieres are like research and development for any kind
Yeah.
of widget, right? It's
Gauging your market.
testing. Yeah.
Yep.
So we beta test it until it's ready for mass consumption, which then is either the Broadway or West End or tour, any of those commercial ventures. So yes, the second step would be to, integrate established and emerging technologies that can kind of monetize digital distribution of our stories. And
Yes.
there's what I mean by that is, kind of what you have going on right now with your streaming platform is ideal in that we can do live captures and make those part of initial contracts rather than trying to go back and negotiate live stage captures after the fact. We can go
Yep.
ahead and integrate those into the initial contract, get that, story stage production recorded, and then monetize that through digital distribution of the story. Um, uh,
Which
Presumably your
which
streaming platform.
nobody's really doing yet.
Not really. There's Broadway HD, and then of course, Disney bought the rights to Hamilton, so Hamilton's streaming on Disney. Come From Away, Apple paid, for that. But all of these were kind of negotiated after the fact. And I
Yeah,
think that's where it gets squirrely. And if everybody, all the designers, everyone, the actors, all of the creatives know, hey, this is definitely something what we're gonna do, then we can work with the unions in negotiating those, because equity and all the others that are specific to theater are really not necessarily designed for live stage capture. It's come a long way, particularly since COVID. But prior to the COVID shutdown, it was almost impossible to actually formally record. That was just the royalties and the structure was crazy. But all of that to say, I just think there's a solution of doing all of that on the front end rather than trying to come back around, once the show's kind of up and running, if you will.
I got
And then
you.
finally, the
Keep
third
going.
step is that this is a fund. So we're creating a portfolio of stories. And this is classic portfolio theory for investment. You minimize or reduce the inherent risk of kind of one-off investing in cherry picking a show that might or might not work. Rather, you invest in a slate of shows, 5 or 10, while you take smaller portions of other shows that are open in any given season, and you just continue to minimize the exposure while maximizing the opportunity for return. So for what it's worth, those are my 3 steps: control our pipeline, integrate established and emerging technologies for monetized digital distribution of stage plays, and then just the inherent idea of classic portfolio theory applied to theater. If we invest in a portfolio of projects rather than a one-off, we increase the chances of a success, because as one title alone
Yep.
can turn into billions of dollars.
Changes everything.
Offsets the entire,
Exactly.
yeah, right.
Exactly.
Uh,
Um,
so the
hy
curation process,
hyper.
yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Keep going, please.
So the
No, no, you keep
curation
going. I just want to make
process
sure.
is the curation process is really based on what I said earlier, which is the good and the beautiful and the true. So I think I talked about quantifying that. So I want to break that down for you just a little bit too. I think good is the most objective thing that we can quantify. We can, just like say probably what you guys do in film. We can ask certain questions that have very objective, right and wrong kind of answers. Is this script well written? Is the plot well constructed? Are the characters authentic and well developed? If you believe that, Aristotelian story structure is the right way, which I do, are the 6 elements of drama properly balanced? Plot, character, at the top, special effects and other things down at the bottom. And, just does the story adhere to the kind of the rules of the genre? I think these are all very objective questions that you can look at and go, yes, objectively, this is a good story. And so a good story well told turns into, influence of the human condition and our global society, but it also turns into a return on investment for those who put money up for it. So good is objective. Um, Beautiful is very subjective, right? What is beautiful? And so there's a series of questions that I would ask of any script that I'm evaluating to determine if it's beautiful. Does the story evoke an appropriate emotional response? If it's a tragedy, that should elicit one thing. If it's a comedy, it should elicit other, reactions. So do we get an appropriate emotional response? If it's a musical, does that music actually move me? Do I develop a connection with the characters, those human beings that we're watching in this story? Do I want to root them on, or do I want to see their demise? Do I feel better for having spent time, with this story? And does it to be really kind of spiritual. Does it breathe oxygen into my soul? Because I believe that beauty is oxygen. And we're missing a lot of that in our world today. You know, everything is black and white, and there's good and bad, and this side and that side. But man, beauty is in kind of the diversity of us all. Beauty's in the grayness of our world. Beauty's in our shared lived experience. And so, you know, if I tell a layered story, I should feel my soul resonate with that because it reflects how my life has gone, which is highly layered, nuanced, and textured. But those are subjective questions. And then you get into the side of truth, and that's where it gets to be a little bit of a hybrid. We've got objectivity and subjectivity coming together for true. So, does this story reveal a truth about our, human condition? Does the truth of this story help me understand and develop empathy for those that are different from me, whether that's based on orientations or socioeconomic status or different, whatever? And then just basically, am I inspired to be a better human being for having experienced this story? So there's objectivity in this, and that, yes, we know what truth looks like based on our own experience, but then there's some subjectivity as well, like, do I develop more empathy for this person because now I've seen them? And what I think differentiates these questions for theater as opposed to for film or television or streaming is just the idea that in theater, it's a very unique experience. We know we're watching another live human being who is the same size as us. You know, the beauty of cinema is that we can watch people's faces 40 feet tall, but
True.
that size, while it immerses us, it also helps us draw a wall and go, well, that's them, that's not me. Meanwhile, in theater, you look at another human being, 10, 20, 40, 50 feet away from you, and you
Real
have to
time.
relate, you know?
Yeah, real time emotions. Yeah.
Right.
That's why I love
So,
the theater. One thing to ask you, not to get off of any of this, but when we've got the regional like touring grid, right, and circuit, the ecosystem, would you do different plays at each theater, like at the same time? So, for example, right, Houston's got this play going on, Nashville's got this play going on, but then when they go and tour, the play that's going on in that area is put on in the other area. So it's like almost a rotating play lineup because they're learning it in each place. Do you understand
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah, I do. So let me speak to that a little bit because what we're establishing a chain of regional theater companies, a chain of regional theater, yeah, companies, plural. That's the right way to say it. And so each theater will be individually programmed to its local community and
I love it.
constituency. And what people in Charlotte like is probably different than what people in Houston like.
Yeah.
Um, and so you think of programming a theater season a lot like you would how you fill out a mall. You would have your anchor tenants. These are the big, traditional musicals or plays or things that most people associate with theater, right? Those are
Yeah.
your anchor tenants. And then you fill in, say, from one end of the mall to the other, you got two anchor tenants at each end. And in the middle are all the local shops or the unique shops that kind of create the culture, if you will, of that area. And so the Houston Mall might have, Macy's and it might have Fifth Avenue at each end, and that would be the same as here in Charlotte. But what fills in between those two stores? Now you're going to have some chains, obviously, but you're also going to have things that are kind of unique to that area. Like we're probably not going to, and I'm just taking a guess here, Charlotte's probably not going to have a Western wear store in the middle of their mall. And that very well may be what Houston has. And that's part of that unique nuance. So each season for each theater company is programmed to identify and meet the needs of the local community.
Oh my
These
God. Yeah,
anchor tenants kind of come through. So our
that,
big shows that we're
sorry.
developing works out.
That's incredible. So one of the things I haven't got to talk about, and I haven't even gotten to talk to Bobby Teresa about this, but because I know he's been developing so much stuff for the stage lately for theater and like human experiences for theater. Like when Sid and I went to his thing in November of 2023, like it was just, I hadn't experienced anything like that before with what he did for mixing his film aesthetic and visuals to what was happening in the performance that was connected to their legacy. It was just incredible. So I wanted to have the two of you kind of architect, you know, the yin and the yang of what that would be. I haven't had a time to talk to him about this. We just recently reconnected. I'm going to get into it at his premiere in Tribeca for his new movie. But what would your thoughts be on something like that? Because that's an important thing to me too, is programming like culturally to like what each area is connected to as well.
Well, I think you have to do it that way. Otherwise, the company becomes irrelevant and it doesn't fulfill the goal. If the theater company can't sustain itself and stay open as a nonprofit, so
Yeah.
that means, the local nonprofit has to seek not just subscribers to its theater, but it also needs sponsorships and local grants and other things that are going to help
Yep.
it kind of flow through. And the only way you're going to get those is if your programming and your educational offerings and other things that theater companies are accustomed to doing are unique to each community in which they reside. So
Gotcha.
yeah, you have to do it. It's not whether I like it or not. It's this is the way it has to work in order to be successful. So yes, we have to.
Awesome. Keep going, Bruce.
So the model is tried and true, and my research is pretty thorough. I mean, I'm happy to share, and again, my book really footnotes and documents all the research I've done. But just to kind of hit the highlights here, one of the things that maybe is different about theater than say film is that we are definitely kind of a back end industry. So our upfront costs are labor intensive and expensive, but we're talking about somewhere in a 15 to $20 million range for a new musical, and we're talking about 4 to 6 million for a new play. Now, some of these plays that are up on Broadway right now might come in a little more than that because
Yeah.
I mean it's major star wattage power that's selling tickets right now.
Well, so on that, because I want to ask questions on some of these points because it's important too, because they're talking points also.
Yep.
Um, do you need star power in your opinion, knowing the theater world and Broadway, right? Because I deal with brands and remakes and reboots, all that stuff. So if you have something like Lion King, do you have to have star power in that, or is it going to sell itself basically? Do you, because I asked this for a very specific reason,
Yeah.
because of, with who you are in Broadway and what your work has been nominated for and also won. That was one of the main reasons of when I came to you, and I'm gonna, for the purpose of this, since I'm the one taking the heat, I'll leave the entities nameless, but to have an IP that you could have access to on a film level. I mean, are there some particular projects that you've thought about and have looked at that are at studios that if you had the opportunity on Broadway, you're like, I would do this?
So the answer to the second question, are there properties that I would love to develop? The answer is yes to that. And
Okay.
the answer to the first question, which is do we need star power? That answer is yes and no.
Okay.
If you are developing a musical, then the answer is no. The title should be the star. So, like for example, right now on Broadway, one of the more successful properties that opened this year is Death Becomes Her. There's not a single star. Now, there's some Broadway stars, but that's different than the A-list
That's a
Hollywood
great,
global
great win
star,
for a
right?
play, man. I didn't
Right.
realize that they put that on the stage. That's awesome. That's
Right.
awesome.
And it's going
I've
like
been busy.
gangbusters, but you don't need star power for a musical, even a new musical that might not be based on a known entity. So you're talking about IP that already exists, but a good portion of my portfolio is on global personalities, celebrities that kind
Yeah.
of already exist. Grace Kelly, Fats Domino,
All legacies. I
the
love it.
artwork of Gil
That's awesome.
Eldren, one of the famous pinup artists, and advertising guy for Coca-Cola, by the way.
Hey, hey,
Um,
there we go, Coca-Cola. Wait,
but
will you talk about which play is that? What play is
that's
that?
called Pinups, and this is about the life and artwork of Gil
Okay.
Elfgren, and
Okay.
he was a artist who obviously did a lot of pinup work, but he was also an artist who painted a lot of Coca-Cola advertising
Oh
during
my
the time
God,
frame.
Bruce.
His son, Gil Elfgren Jr., is my lifelong mentor. We talk probably once or at least once a month, sometimes more than
Wow.
that. And this is going back to the mid 90s. So he knows, he is well involved in this. He's signed off on this. So
That's
we're
amazing.
gonna really do a great
And every
old fashioned, like the golden age of Broadway kind
I
of
love
musical.
that. Oh my
Uh,
gosh. And every play that you have, you want to incubate too for film and TV,
of
correct?
course, yes.
Yeah.
Because of, I mean, in the same way that some of these properties move from film IP into musicals, it also goes back the other way as well. But just to answer back that first question, so if you're
Yes.
creating a musical, you do not need star power. But I do believe, and I'm 100% convinced, that if you're putting a play on Broadway, you definitely need the wattage, whether that's a revival, whether that's an adaptation of a story that may already exist in a film form, or whether it's a brand new play.
I got you.
You just need star power.
And
But
I
it's
want to
also financially structured different. Like a play is typically like a limited engagement, 16, 20 weeks, somewhere right in that time frame.
yeah.
And it's a smaller capitalization. It's a big, hopefully it's a big cash grab, right? And
Yeah.
you just go in, you sell tickets for as much as you can sell them for, and in 16 weeks you close it down.
So,
Good night and good luck with George Clooney is doing that exact thing right now.
yep.
3 million a week, 4 million a week. I mean,
See, and again, man, just rebooting his IP that already
that's
existed
right.
as a
You're
film.
just
So
He's just smashing Broadway records right now.
that's wild.
Meanwhile, musicals are open-ended. You want those things to run for as long as you possibly can. So your operating expenses need to be lower. That's why there's no stars in them. It's set up to run for a long term. The theater owners want it to run for a long term. And so if you get into something like a Lion King or a Wicked or Jersey Boys that has, multiple years or even
Yeah.
decades, that's going to be, constant passive income for the initial investor, which, by the way, is a great segue kind of back to my point. Broadway
Yep.
is often thought of as this is where I make my money back. And
I was just gonna ask about that.
I have to correct people. Broadway is just the beginning of the earning cycle, which is how I think it's a little bit different than film and television. Well, film, film is gearing up for the opening weekend and you're trying to get, a couple of weeks, a month or so out of it. Meanwhile, you know, for theater, you open on Broadway, you want it to be successful on Broadway, then you want it to go on tour. And then from there, you want to, capitalize on merchandise sales. Then you want to get into the streaming of that and then into the feature film version of that. And then you want to put it up for publishing for regional theaters
What if you did all of that?
all over the world.
Sorry. Can you do all of that at once though? Because the vision that I had when I saw yours was taking all of that and incubating it all at the same time, even to where you've got potentially different actors that are say you've got A-list actors starring in the movie version or TV version, but then
Yeah,
you've also got A-list actors starring in the Broadway version. So it's different people playing the same characters, but you're
yeah.
making a both at the same time. So then almost like the movie promotes the stage play and vice versa.
Yeah.
Um,
So I agree with that. It's traditionally not, hasn't been done
I
that
know that's
way.
the whole point though,
However,
Bruce.
that's exactly the structure of Miss Maud, which is the first project out of the gate, as you know.
Will you talk
In a
about that too?
perfect world,
Sorry.
like, so today is May the 25th. If we had, funding for Miss Maud, tomorrow, What we would do is we would shoot that in August, September. We would immediately take the same director and the same two stars and move them to Broadway for a fall opening. October opening after some rehearsals. And then we would run it for 16 weeks. That would get us through the new year, which would then lead us to the opening of the
I
film.
love it. Yep.
And so, you've got now a film property and a Broadway play property that's built on the same creative team with the
Yep.
same stars, and people can choose to see it in live or on the cinema or both.
Yep.
And I think that really works because I agree with you. And that's one of the disruptions that I want to try to create is this idea that it needs to be a successful film first, or it needs to be a successful play or musical first. I think it can be both at the same time.
Agreed. Yep. That's what, when I saw your deck and your prospectus on all of this, that's
Yeah.
what I saw the most because you thought out every single point. Plus, you can also test so many of these in the regional theater side aspect of it. And then I want to ask you something. I know you're a Broadway person, but isn't Broadway honestly kind of like, let's call it the corporate name for theater? And I don't mean that in a negative standpoint. I mean that as sometimes you're better suited to not be on Broadway with certain things. Yes.
Yeah, that's
Well,
true. So, yeah, Broadway is a brand. That's probably what you mean by corporate side.
yeah. Brand. Yeah.
Yep, it is a
Exactly.
brand. And so the idea of Broadway is it may not be your best first stop, quote unquote, right? You're going to develop
Yeah.
it in the regional theaters of presumably America. And then when it's ready to go commercial, which is why I say Broadway is a brand, because the idea of commercial theater is where you are distinguishing from the nonprofit sector. We're putting money into this play or musical in order for it to make money. That's not what's supposed to happen on the nonprofit side, but that is 100% what it's supposed to do on the commercial side. So it's a catch 22 because Broadway is a brand and it is a highly marketable brand around the
Yep.
world.
Yep.
But it may not be your first stop, but it probably needs to be a stop. So, for example, Miss Maud or any new play might decide that West End, which is cheaper and arguably just as good, West End is the UK equivalent to Broadway.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the first stop for it. Right. And then maybe it goes on tour around the UK or follow example of some shows I've been involved with in the past. It went up in La Jolla. It did fine. Not really great. They took it, retooled it, put it up somewhere else, and got it to where they thought it was really good. Took it down to Australia. It went like gangbusters. Then they took it over to Korea. It went like gangbusters. And then they brought it here to America. That's a great stop. Now, here's the catch 22 though with Broadway. It may not need to be the first stop, but sometimes it has to be a stop.
Hey, stop. Got you.
And the reason for that is because uh, usually in America, it will sell better on tour if you can brand it the Broadway musical or the Broadway play coming to your town. But in China, it has to have come from Broadway. Otherwise, their audiences don't want it.
Got you. So, that's a good thing to bring up too. So, California, right? Venice. I mean, we have such a diverse, active theater population in California, but outside of the Pantages, there's really no place to showcase, what could be Broadway level plays. So what you and I have discussed, and I'm not going to talk about the particular area on Venice Beach, but do you think that a venue that's got the energy of Broadway and the foot traffic of, say, the boardwalk down there would do numbers in a capacity that nothing in California and theater kind of has before, just because of the level of not only engagement from people constantly walking by, but what could potentially be done in the right venue with the right setting with the talent in California and theater?
I definitely think that there is room for another successful regional theater, nonprofit regional theater company. And if you can cultivate those audiences, say in Venice Beach, to expect that they are a pre-Broadway stop rather than a post-Broadway stop, I think you can get some real traction in that.
Got you. And I'm even talking about, I'm not even talking about necessarily the nonprofit, regional
Yeah.
theater side of it. I'm talking about an actual venue that's a real estate, like a Pantages, because
Yeah.
Pantages, they're
So if
making
you're,
money.
yeah, so in that's structured differently because then that becomes like a presenting house. And
Yes.
then it would be a matter of, I think it would be a matter. So let me just pause real quick and say this is just what I think. I think there needs to be some real research on this. But off the cuff, my gut tells me that yes, if you put a presenting house somewhere in that Venice Beach area and you network or contract something like a Broadway Across America or with the
Yeah.
Nederlanders, and it becomes one of the stops in their tours, then yes. If you don't want to contract with them, I think it becomes a little more difficult, not impossible. But those two organizations are the kind of the big dogs in Broadway touring. Now, programming the space outside of Broadway can be really lucrative as well. So let's not get just locked in on what a Broadway tour can do. You would want it to be a hub for the music scene,
Yep.
concerts coming through,
Yep.
potentially a hub for stand-up comics coming through.
Yep.
You would want it to be something along those lines as well. So
All of the above. And there's really only, you just said the two of them. There's really only like two major, like national touring off Broadway, see, I don't even know the area of this Bruce, Broadway
yeah.
groups.
Yeah, so
That's it.
Broadway tours, there are others. I'm just saying that the biggest organizations would be Broadway Across America. They control a number of theaters, and their shows are always going to go to the same one. So a show, let's just say, for example, Miss Maud goes up on Broadway and it turns real successful. We would contract with the Nederlanders or with Broadway Across America. Now, the reality is, if we opened up in a Schubert theater, there's three theater owners on Broadway. There's the Schuberts, the Nederlanders, and then Jew Jamson. Jew Jamson's a smaller player, but the two main ones are the Schuberts and the Nederlanders. So if it goes up in a Nederlander theater, then chances are we would want to contract with the Nederlander organization to go to their theaters that they own regionally or have contracted with. They don't really own them. These are performing arts centers that are usually built by the city, and they have a Broadway series, and it's usually, whatever the Nederlander or the Broadway Across America has. Now, there is an independent, I think it's called the IPN, Independent Producers Network, and that is separate from both the Nederlander organization and Broadway Across America. And they've done a pretty good job of how they invest in shows, requiring those shows to be a first stop in a tour. So we could explore various options and scenarios to determine what the best path forward is.
Got you.
Do it by the show or whatever. But yeah, that would essentially kind of be, at least
Awesome.
on the Broadway portion of that, that would be where we would go. Now,
Got
with
you.
respect to music and stand up, then we're gonna get in with other promoters,
Yep.
and they're gonna want their acts coming through, and we can discern which are the acts that fill our space the best. Again, based on kind of that local proclivity for whatever their appetite is for entertainment, right?
Correct.
Right? I
And
mean,
now,
if you're in Houston, you're probably going to be heavy on country music. If you're in
yeah,
Venice
exactly.
Beach, maybe not so much.
Exactly. And now you've talked about Miss Maud, just, people that are listening to this that aren't familiar. Will you talk about Miss Maud and basically what the story is? and
Yeah.
also where you've been at the progression with that, and who's involved as it relates to writing and directing?
Yeah, sure. Love to.
Thank
So,
you.
a little backstory. This is a true story set in 1951 in the low country of South Carolina. And the low country of South Carolina is the Charleston and inland areas in that component. It's very rural, very poor, even by today's standards. If you're in the country down south, you might call it the back country, but very rural, sand hills, pines, and that sort of thing. So that's the idea. Uh, Poverty stricken in 1951, not much better today. Complete and total healthcare desert is a term we would use today. So that's the setting. The two main characters, true people, Maud Callan and famous Life magazine photojournalist by the name of Eugene Smith. He was also a pretty incredible photographer in his own right, outside of just photojournalism for Life magazine. And in fact, if you use Photoshop at all today, a lot of the techniques that are built into Photoshop are techniques that he developed and was doing by hand with chemicals and Q-tips that we just click a mouse button today. But he developed a lot of those kind of concepts. So who are Maud Callan and Eugene Smith, and how do they end up meeting each other? So Eugene Smith is a famous Life magazine photojournalist based in New York, Life magazine headquarters, but he had been sent out. His backstory is he had covered conflicts for Life magazine all over the globe. He had ended up getting pretty severely injured, almost got his face blown off in one of the conflicts. I believe it might have been the Korean War, but I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go fact check that. But because of that injury, he got addicted to painkillers, alcoholism, and also because he was away from home more often than he was at home, he basically neglected his family and had multiple affairs. So all of that culminates with the opening of our story, where we find Eugene Smith really having a breakdown, a nervous breakdown. He's addicted to everything, his family's in shambles, and his job with Life magazine is on the rocks at best. So they send him off to what today we would call rehab, but at the time it would have been they sent him into the psych ward, the psych hospital. When he gets out, he wants to get back to work. He wants to go over to Spain. He had been jonesing to do a photo essay on a midwife institute in Spain. And Life magazine was like, the last place we're going to send you is out of the country. We found a midwife institute down in South Carolina. You can go there, take it or leave it. So he goes, I'll take it. And that kind of gets him down to South Carolina. So let's back up the tape and get the foundation for Maud Callan. Who is Maud Callan? Maud Callan is a very poor black woman raised in Florida, probably not far from your home.
Yep.
And she wanted to be a doctor like her uncle, who had adopted her when her own family fell apart. She wanted to be a doctor, but in 1951, women were not going to be doctors, much less a black woman. So the way that she was going to overcome that was go to nursing school, but she didn't have the funds for that. So her church, which would have been the Episcopal Church, paid for her nursing school. And in order to repay the church, they required her to do a 1 year missionary service to the poor people outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So she ends up going there. She does a 1 year stint, but falls in love with the people and the country and aside. And basically, she just never leaves. She ends up spending her entire life down there, and she becomes not just a nurse. Not just a midwife, but a nurse midwife. So she, in this healthcare desert, if you needed vaccinations, if you needed stitching up, if you had any kind of sickness, illness, or injury that didn't absolutely require a hospital visit, she was the person to do that. And so she had started a midwife institute to train other women in the area on um, help women give birth. And I mean like how to do it in a clean, safe, hygienic environment, because the stories that are reported in this are heartbreaking and horrible, cutting umbilical cords with rusty tin cans because they didn't necessarily know any better, but that's also what they had laying around. And the mortality rate was through the roof. And so she was really having a profound impact. And that is why Life magazine sent Eugene Smith down to this little town called Pineville, South Carolina, where he was ostensibly going to photo document this midwife institute, but immediately became attracted. And I mean that not in in
Yeah.
uh, some kind of weird way, erotic way. He was attracted to this woman's work and recognized that she was the subject of his photo essay. So basically, he kind of forces himself on to her world, and she acquiesces. She was humble and kind and did not want any attention. And she certainly didn't want somebody kind of getting all up in her business. She was definitely a no nonsense person. So she says to Eugene, you can live on my back porch. And he did for about 3 months, literally lived on her back porch, which was screened in. He turned one of her sewing rooms into his dark room, and basically kind of became a gadfly, which she both resented and ultimately saw the advantage of her story being told in order to help raise the profile of what the people in the Low Country were going through. So our story takes place when those two meet. And over the next 3 months, we watch him photo document her world, her life, all the craziness, including some of the inherent 1950s racism of the Deep South, but also how she, as the caregiver, the medical professional in that area, was able to overcome racism simply because these people needed what she provided, which was health care. And she gave unjudgmentally to poor and rich and black and white and everyone in between. The governor of South Carolina discovered that some Yankee photographer from Life magazine was down there taking pictures of a black woman, his words, not mine, and tried to shut it down. And ultimately, he called up Life magazine in New York and said, we're going to boycott you if you don't do this. We're going to shut you out of the state of South Carolina, and I'll rally all of my neighboring states, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, to do the same. So Life magazine calls Eugene Smith back home to New York City. Eugene is adamant. He is apoplectic that this has to happen. He fights tooth and nail to get this story published. It took a meeting of the board of Life magazine to actually decide that indeed they were going to run. It became
Absolutely
one of
wild.
their biggest selling issues. The boycott did not materialize, but what did happen is people were so moved by the work of Maud Callan that they began sending in nickels and dimes and pennies and quarters. And then other people jumped on board and began sending medical supplies. And they
So
built,
this was like the first kind of viral news
yeah, totally.
journalism
You're
campaign.
absolutely right, Will. This was a viral moment before we even knew what that meant.
Wild.
And that kind of penny campaign built her a medical clinic because she was doing this by
It
making house
created
calls prior to
it
the clinic
created
being
a
built.
sorry, I was gonna say it created an entire legacy.
Yeah, that clinic is still standing today. It's part of the National Historic Record
Wow.
Register. I mean, she's featured in the Smithsonian Museum. She's obviously featured in South Carolina. But
Why do
if
you
you
I was
don't really
sorry.
know that those two
That's
things, you probably have
yeah.
never heard of Maud Calloway.
That's what I was just gonna say. Why do you think a spotlight hasn't been shined on her in this story
I know
until
exactly
now?
why it hasn't. Because once that article ran and she got all of the notoriety, her humility, her God-fearing humility said, enough is enough. 60 Minutes asked for a meeting, asked for a set. She turned them down. Every major news organization asked her for an interview. She turned every one of them down. And consequently, she died in relative obscurity as
You,
kind of a
man,
local
wow.
legend.
See
And
now,
her story's just not been told.
now that's interesting because I know your faith, and obviously you have been with me on my journey of enlightenment and spiritual awakening that I've gone through. One of the main people I've shared this with. Um, do you think, right, that I'm just separate from the story right now about faith? Do you think the Creator God was putting her in a position to elevate, what was going on at that point, but she kind of went the opposite direction of potentially the path that she was being put on?
I do. I think there's probably something to be said for divine timing. I'd like to think that now is the right time for her story to be told,
Yeah.
mainly because what she was dealing with in the low country of South Carolina in 1951 is what our world, our entire globe is experiencing right now. Charlotte is one of the largest cities in America. It's not the largest by any stretch, but it's one of the larger cities. We still have problems with access to health care for the poorest of poor, regardless of race. There are entire swaths of our world, countries where healthcare is just not readily available because they're not a wealthy country. And so
Yeah.
when you look at what's going on around the world, when you look at what's happening even here in America, in the poorer sections of our first world country, we have the same problems today. Black women still die in a disproportionate number to any other women during childbirth. Nothing has changed from 1951 to 2025. And right now is where we're talking about it. We have an administration and a government that says, okay, maybe we don't need to provide these services. And other people are saying, yeah, we need to have a safety net. We need to provide basic health care for people who cannot afford health care, not just here in America, but around the world. It is a timely conversation that really, honestly, has so little to do with race. I think that's probably
Yeah.
one of the misconceptions of this story is that you got a black woman and a white man. She's Christian. He's a lapsed Catholic at best. So northerner, southerner, I mean, it's all rife, it's all conflict, but these are two equal human beings that do not see each other as black and white. And
Exactly.
the story is not about race. It's really about overcoming the challenges, him sobering up and drying out, her trying to find a way to provide better health care and more resources to the people that she's serving when she has to drive her, 1930s Packard into the deep swamps of South Carolina
I
and then
think,
walk across logs to get to a home that's in the
yeah.
middle of a mosquito infested swamp
Yep.
just so she can take care of a fever or
That's
help
why I
deliver
was
a child.
that's why I responded to this so much. It was two people that were on these very different journeys, but then literally the points in time unite, right? And then
Yep.
they're trying to help each other walk through what those are. That's been so much the parallels of that with me and everybody that I've met along this way, from you to everyone else who's leading this. That's it's such a universal story too at the end of the day,
Yeah.
you know.
And I'll
Well,
do this. This is a shameless plug, Coca-Cola, if you actually listen to this. She went through probably one of the hardest nights of her life with Eugene Smith. It didn't make the news magazine, but it's fully documented. You can look this up. She had a child that had to get to a hospital. The closest one was a whites only hospital. They would not treat this black infant. And that infant ended up dying despite her best efforts. She spent all night with Eugene Smith driving, trying to get to a black hospital to no avail. They made it back to the home. And what she needed at that moment was just to sit on the front stoop with Eugene Smith. And she says this, it's in the magazine, photos and everything. They sit down and they drink an ice cold Coca-Cola.
I want to recreate that shot. I
Oh
want to
yeah,
put
we're
that.
totally going to do that.
So we're doing.
Because she was a devout Christian and she was a teetotaler, and there's no way she's going to go for a drink, and she's trying to sober this guy up.
Yeah.
So she goes for the good stuff.
That's so good. Basically, Rocco Nugent and I, what we're doing, and I've kind of been working on this whole time. I've been creating a viral "Who would you share a Coca-Cola with" campaign, right?
Yeah.
Because there's people that are in this that had to battle various addictions through the years. And so it's about dancing in the dark to then get to the light. And one thing that unites people is Coca-Cola, right? And having a ice
Mhm.
cold Coke. And so I've been taking everybody's timeline, specifically Rocco and myself, from when we had a meeting in Waco when we were pursuing putting this whole ownership group together that ultimately became Project Rise. And we've got the documented journey because his dad is Mr. Ted Nugent, right? He's got a very insightful look and eye, and he films all this stuff because he helps put together the shows and they travel and whatnot. And so I've been on this alternative timeline to try to synchronize these together, right? To do everything that we're doing. So I've created kind of a viral campaign with just our photos and our connective points and the sitting down and like celebrating these moments that we've had and these milestones to get to these various peaks that we're trying to pursue. And so that's what this whole thing is, Bruce. And so I want to recreate classic scenes for movies within our roster of an ecosystem. And that's basically, let me talk to you about this real quick because I did need your insight on something. Essentially, I've structured this whole thing as a nonprofit film studio. And what I mean by that is because we also own the advertising agency, and well, all streaming companies, most of their revenue is from ads. Well,
Mhm.
now we've got the biggest ecosystem for an ad agency, not just writers, directors, producers, but also talent that own it. So all the artists control the ad agency. And that's something that the investors can invest in when they invest in the studio. And I'm not going to get into the full detail. We'll have a separate offline call because I don't want to put too much of this out right now. But I've set this whole thing up to create a complete, basically, circle of going from one side of the tree to the other, all in a nonprofit manner. And then the other business verticals in the ecosystem, specifically the hotel ownership group, well, that's where all the revenue comes from in the investment. So I got the final downloads for that. So I'll call you tomorrow. We'll talk about that because I got to get some more of it mapped out today. But I think with your background, and if you don't mind talking a little bit about some of that other work that you do on the nonprofit side, and then some of the other things that you sit on, because this is for the powers to be to understand exactly the leadership that we have in this, specifically in the manner that you're helping me build and oversee with what we've been aligned on, and then what you kind of vision us being able to do with this telethon. And then if you also talk about the educational components we've been discussing.
Right. So yeah, I've been involved with theater really since, I mean, to date myself, going all the way back to college, which is, early 90s. Um, and then I have been involved off and on with a nonprofit organization named CETA. I became the volunteer executive director in 2019. So I produce theater in educational scenarios. I produce theater in a nonprofit, and I certainly do it for commercial ventures as well, while at the same time volunteering my time to run this organization called CETA, Christians in the Arts, and specific. It's been primarily a theater specific organization. We're looking to kind of branch that out to really include music, dance, maybe some visual arts, but certainly all encompassing of the performing arts. And this is more of I like to think of it more like a foster church for artists, that is a place for them to come together to be understood, to receive spiritual refreshment and renewal through retreats and other things along those lines. And we try to service the whole body. So, in addition to providing, some of their spiritual needs, we try to meet their physical and professional needs as well. Particularly, as an example, particularly during the pandemic when the entire theater industry shut down, CETA went into action. We fed and paid electric bills for hundreds of artists around the world. We have, members, if you will, all over the world. And we were there trying to meet some of their physical needs, like providing them fresh food, paying their rent, paying for some utilities so that they didn't lose heat or AC or their electricity, things like that. But we also do educational components like professional development, workshops, seminars, weekend, things like that. And then I run what has been happening kind of over the past maybe decade that we've had that's taken a lot of our attention in CETA is this idea of a secondary theater festival. It's a high school centric theater festival where we have created a competition that ultimately is trying to teach and enhance audition skills, auditions to get a job or to get into college. And that's one of the things that CETA focuses on quite heavily is how do we support kind of that next generation artist. So when you look at CETA, we have kind of three catchphrases. We want to cultivate, empower, and sustain. And so if you look at our purpose statement, CETA cultivates environments that empower and sustain all Christians in the arts. So what does cultivate, empower, and sustain mean to us? Cultivate means how do we cultivate that spiritual formation of the artist? How do we cultivate a relationship between the Big C church of the world and the artists and the creatives? How do we mend that? Because, our relationship with the church, specifically theater, but the arts in general, has been fraught since the beginning. Go back
Yeah.
all the way back to the ancient Rome when the church was just starting up. It didn't really like what Rome was doing. And so consequently, Roman theater, Roman forms of entertainment, all of that was frowned upon. And to this day, it's still that way. So CETA really wants to cultivate that relationship and help artists find and meet their spiritual needs while at the same time helping churches understand how do we minister to artists because they have a unique set. They don't live like the 9 to 5, cubicle warriors that most of the people that go to church, represent. So that's what our
Yep.
cultivate is. Empower, we want to empower the next generation to do what they believe they have been created or called to do. And so for us, that means how do we, in the form of a secondary theater festival, create audition skills that help them graduate from high school into competitive, legitimate college programs? How do we help them audition properly to get the job or to get into that? How do we help them audition well to graduate from an undergraduate to a graduate program? And then how do we help them get out of a graduate program or an undergrad and into professional theater? So that's really what our empowerment is all about. And then our sustain, we want to sustain the working artist. We want to do that through professional development. We want to do that by creating a network of like-minded people so that if they need, a creative team filled out, they know that there's a group called CETA that has access. We're not an agency, so don't confuse us with that. But there is a network of like-minded people if you want to work with like-minded people, meaning we're all Christians and we're all creatives. So let's go from that baseline. But also, Empower is about, professional development, so we host all manner of continuing education and professional development components. So if you are working in I use this example quite a bit, but if you're working in a nonprofit theater company and you happen to be the director of development or, the financial director, maybe there's new rules and regulations about what a nonprofit reporting should look like. Well, we would call in experts and create a workshop that would count towards continuing education credit or professional development for your organization and would be a one-stop place for you to come and get information about what the new reporting standards are, just something along those lines. Now, how this all ties into the repertoire fund, and one gap that I believe CETA has been missing is that we have traditionally not been a producing or a presenting entity, and we're changing that under my direction as the executive director. We are going to start producing new works. We're going to start presenting new works, ostensibly through this network of regional theater companies under this umbrella, so that we help artists, in this case, writers, bring their work to life. And once a writer's work comes to life, then you're engaging directors, designers, actors, all of the personnel that it takes to run a nonprofit theater company, all the additional personnel that's going to take to bring that into the commercial realm. And so that is a huge component of the sustain aspect of our mission or purpose statement. So there's a ton more I could talk about. This is also listed in my book, The Problem with the Dot, but those are the headlines of what I do and what I've been doing for my entire professional career, starting in the early to mid 90s all the way up to now. So for the past, what, 30, 40 some odd years?
Thank you, Bruce. And now, education. We have identified some land. Obviously, we need to get you up to the place in Atlantic City that Melanie and Rasta have been overseeing and starting to build an infrastructure around. But College of Education, Sports and
Yep.
Media.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I should probably point that out. I probably glossed over that. So when you look at our empower, cultivate, empower, and sustain as part of our educational component, I do have a dream of creating a high school arts boarding school that is by audition only. Um, Maybe a little bit like Interlochen, but something a little more specific and tailored to what I believe we need for the burgeoning next generation Christian artists.
yep.
And I also kind of envision a world where we could potentially create a graduate level conservatory that would compete with, some of the more well-known conservatories known around the world today, because we I think there just needs to be a different voice. Not that their voices are wrong, but there should be some options, and one more is not going to hurt. So I probably didn't mention that, but a lot of what you and I have talked about offline with
Yep.
property, in Pineywood,
Yep.
Georgia,
Yep.
and now here, all revolve around basically the same concept of how do we create an actual institute of some sort where high school students can come from all over the world, live and train on our campus, get educated, graduate, and then be ready for the next chapter, whether that's our conservatory or someone else's conservatory. But we do have that graduate level work so that we're producing the next top flight artists
And
that are
and
going
that's
to
that.
totally create beauty in the world.
Sorry, you got my brain going because that's the connective point that got me excited about when I met you was the fact that as these young men and women are pursuing that craft at the high school level per se, they could actually have the opportunities to be involved in our plays that we're doing on Broadway and whatnot within
100%.
our ecosystem. And that's not something that exists anywhere else currently in the world. So it's almost like a really sort of Broadway, take what the G League is, right? For the NBA for basketball. I got to
Yep.
do sports analogies to make it make sense sometimes. And basically, that's what we have, but on the high school level, for soon to be professional theater actors. I mean, you could discover a talent who's starring with A-listers on Broadway, and then going to class Monday through Friday. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the vision because it's so possible and it's really
Yeah.
easy to implement. Just for whatever reason it's never happened. So that's the opportunity with Piney Woods, since we are building the studio there. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about, because obviously we've got some connects as it relates to with the states involved being able to utilize some prime IP and music. So do you think having won a Tony for what you won a Tony Award for connected to that region, do you think that something like a Broadway venue at Pineywood School in a film studio situation would draw an audience from not just the state but all over?
Yeah, I do. I mean, honestly, and certainly if I mean, there's a lot of logistics, but I think there's a opportunity to also look into how well it might be supported in the public sector as well.
Yeah.
If there are any incentives for producing film and stage in that area, akin to what Louisiana has going on. Those are opportunities for us to do that. Certainly, early stage development work, you do want that to be obscure. And I don't mean to use that term pejoratively with respect to Mississippi or piney woods, but you do want to kind of be in a place where it can incubate. And so if you
Yeah.
start thinking of piney woods as an incubator more as a final step, I think there's a
Yep.
lot of value into that. Incubating the next generation of artists, incubating the next graduate level artists, incubating new works till they're ready to have a broader light shined on them. I think there's a lot of merit in that idea for sure. And then to whatever extent, the public sector is able to help support that through any incentives, cherry on top.
100%. I want to talk about, thanks for spending so much time today too, by the way, my friend.
Mhm.
I want to talk real quick about the spontaneous evolution into a Levolution telethon. I know I didn't get to have you on that follow-up call, but like I said, you, David Womark, a handful of others are spearheading this with me and focusing on so each one of us are going to take certain things, right, to program into this. What I'm doing is, because I had to go back and face all of the trauma from my past that was self-inflicted and also by others, right, to come to this place of being centered now to connect all this together to make it happen. That was the journey of life for me. And so I played this character of a producer for 20 years with these dreams of being a director. But see, I suppressed my own dreams because I was chasing money. I was making
Mhm.
money, which is the root of all, the love of it, the root of all evil. I was in love with getting to the place to where it happened, right? And
Mhm.
then when I finally let all that go towards getting baptized and afterwards, this whole 14, 15-month journey, it made me realize that we needed to focus on things that we've been through in the past to not only have both of those sides heal, whoever's the guilty party, it doesn't even matter because in that person's viewpoint, they're not guilty of anything at times. So that almost needs to be acknowledged too from the programming of how we are in society. So I've gone back since I'm retiring as a producer. Will Clevinger, the producer, doesn't exist anymore. I'm William Potter Clevinger. I'm directing. That's it. I'm gonna get everybody's stuff made with this right. Everyone that I've made promises to and commitments, but I'm not taking any credits. I'm going out on Cutthroat City. That forever connected my legacy to some of the most tremendous artists of all time who I've been a sponge to since I made it. I haven't made a movie since then. I've been blessed to be welcomed into select members of Wu Tang and their family, and it changed my life. And it got me to
Mhm.
fully consciously wake up. There's some of the most in tune artists of any generation, much less the last 30 years, which they've been around for. They built a global brand. So I learned a thing or two. That's how I did all this. Canyon Country Store is a brand. It was able to drop the store portion of it, still build stores everywhere, but take that brand and modernize it. And so that's what we're doing with Wu Tang involved, select members. And so that being said, I realized during this entire journey how all this was connecting together. So I'm tackling a specific issue on abuse because it's connected to my directorial debut. And that's not just physical between a man and a woman, but even mental abuse in the workplace. Troy, the movie that he wrote for Sydney to star in before he passed away, that he was going to direct with his directorial debut, was about trauma he had experienced in the workplace the first time he wanted to commit suicide. And so he put it in art. So that became a very strong thing that I wanted to shine a spotlight on. And not in a manner to cancel anybody, but in a manner to have conversations about these issues on both sides, to reflect on them and come to a place of healing, no matter what those people have put each other through. And I'm going to do that with Andrew Klein, who shot a gun at me because I forgive him. So, and focusing on the themes of peace, love, kindness, and forgiveness, knowing that as a foundational cornerstone without, I don't know how much of the book you've gotten into yet, but what would you think you would want to do? And having seen the telethons like we had from Dick Clark and Jerry Lewis, which is why we brought in Bill Boyd, what do you think you would want to see or that you're thinking about doing in this to create global impact, to shine spotlights in a manner that need to be seen, and also potentially connect to some of the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think Well, I think if it is truly a fundraiser, you should probably stick to, one or two, whatever your two main causes are there.
Oh,
Um,
that not to interject, but that's the thing. So this is multiple charities, 2 day event. Everybody that's going to make up the telethon are all people connected to the IP that we're doing right, or those relationship trees. And
mhm,
specifically, we're launching our foundations with this, connected to land we already have. So Sleepy Cat, several others, the Lacey McGee, the Troy DeVoe Foundation, all things dealing with, trafficking to domestic abuse, the war, all of it. And so this isn't just going to be here, it's going to be a global thing. I'd already prepped it with partners in literally China on the media side, which that's one of the reasons why we're going over there. And this is all still coming together. And now that I just activated it, it's happening fast. But the artist that you are, and also the stage producer that you've been,
mhm,
I'm leaning heavily on some of the elements of this because I know what theme I'm going to deliver and bring to this, but I think that's how we're going to split this whole entire thing off. And I mean, we're really just now starting to cook this, but the whole thing's prepped with all the locations. So now we just have to literally plan the, show
mhm.
and how big that's going to be.
Yeah.
I'm asking
So,
you specifically because I've had conversations with everyone else. This one's kind of on the record, but I want to know what you're thinking because we haven't got to talk about that, you and I.
right. So, there's a couple of things that maybe come to my mind. I don't know if they fit exactly. I think I do have a lot of experience with big music festivals, at least located kind of here in this region.
Yeah.
But what would I want to emphasize? I think there's a couple of things that are uh, kind of near and dear to me. I think to whatever extent we can emphasize the idea of CETA and those artists and creatives who identify as Christian and would want to find a like-minded spiritually focused community probably just need to know we exist. I
Yeah.
think that that's a key component. Outside of that, um, there are two areas that I think are important. Um, the first is the Hurricane Helene recovery component. Now, we had a big concert by country music artists, and that was in the initial aftermath. But as time has gone on, that money has been used. It was just reported, I believe, this week that the Trump administration has decided to withdraw some of the emergency funding for the cleanup efforts that are going on up there. And so I just get the notion that there's probably a real need for, people to know that there is a pretty significant portion of our state that is really destroyed, like a war zone kind of destroyed. And the cleanup efforts and the rebuilding is substantial. And so, to that end, I would like to see us focus on kind of the mountain music, the bluegrass, newgrass kind of component artists. Have a lot of connections in that world and would be happy to try and bring some of those artists in. So different than the country music concert that happened
Yeah.
in Leon, but focusing a little bit more on the bluegrass area and that style of music, which I think is on the verge of having a pretty substantial renaissance. We'll see if I'm right on that. I don't quote me. But I think it's growing in popularity with today's generation of listeners, and they're
Yeah.
discovering some of this. Plus, I also think that some of the new bluegrass artists are veering off of the tried and true traditional path and are starting to do what all artists do, which is take the tradition and blend it with other genres. So a little bit of rock and roll might be blended in, a little bit of country might be blended in, a little bit of jazz might be blended in, a little bit of new age music might be blended in. Whatever their particular proclivities are. And there's some really, really good, I think the term would be newgrass music that's out there that's really kind of a fusion of bluegrass and something else. So there's that. And then I don't know if I've ever told you this, but we the second thing that I would want to focus on is just out of respect of my own family. We fostered three children that we ultimately adopted,
Wow. I
and
didn't know that, Bruce.
so all three of those children came out of abusive, devastatingly bad home life.
Wow.
And so I understand on a very uh, personal level what foster care can do for a child, what adoption does for children, and focusing on those children that are in abusive situations that get yanked out of their homes by DSS or something else, and why a good foster parent's important, what adoption can do for a child. Those are all areas that I think need greater exposure, particularly the idea of foster care. What I would do if I had a component is I would treat this almost like a great performances on PBS, and I would put up a show by a new playwright, and I believe the name of the show is Foster Mom, but I'll have to go back and look. But she too was a foster parent, and she has written a really powerful play that has not been premiered yet, that I think would be an exceptional artistic expression of what's going on in our world and why it's important for foster care. And I would put that play up, and I would, like I said, kind of like PBS, I would break into that, between acts or between scenes within acts, in order to kind of talk about the cause. Hit us up with the donations at the QR code or the number at the bottom of the screen, or whatever. But those are the two kind of big components, I guess three if you count CETA, raising the profile and just, you know, Q rating, if you will, a star
Yeah.
rating of CETA, talking about the recovery efforts here in North Carolina from Hurricane Helene, and raising awareness of foster care and foster to adopt for, particularly for Christians who claim to be pro-life.
Yeah.
We don't always do a great job of what does it mean other than just being anti-abortion. And there's got
Yeah.
to be more than just I don't want you killing babies. Okay, if we don't kill the
Yeah.
babies, then what?
Yeah.
Then what? We must put action to our pro-life stance. And for us, that meant fostering children and adopting those children and trying to do what we could in a very practical way
Yeah. I
to
love that.
say,
I love
you know,
that. Could come up with something instead of just being like, it's this way or that way.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
It's not enough to stand on the side. This is, you want to know who Bruce Long is at a base level. It's we cannot stand in a picket line.
Yeah.
Picket lines and protest lines only do so much. If you
Facts.
want real change, you have to do it. And ideally, you have to do it
Action.
from inside,
Yep. Action through action and taking it from the
right?
inside out. I know a thing or two
Yeah.
about that.
Right. You don't stand outside a movie theater and boycott the film. Become a filmmaker and make different film.
There it is. And that's what I've done this week, Bruce. So that's what
Yep.
I'm gonna get back to finishing this edit. I'm excited to get this out and get our journey to this point out there.
Hmm.
And then we'll get to actually do this work. I'll be in touch with you over the next couple days. I'm gonna get a new number between now and Tuesday, and
Okay.
you'll have it. You're one of the few people, and I don't want to share with anybody because this is the activation finally, man. I had to make Ocala home base quite
Hmm.
literally, and what Tommy Bina and I and Bruce and David Walmark, Sydney, Joey, you, et cetera, are going to be able to do, starting with the foundation here in my hometown that has great tourist traffic because it's close to downtown. The drive-in theaters popping every practical night, and
Hmm.
what we have the ability to do there
with the land around it, which literally only myself and John Travolta had the capacity to do because we're the only ones that really know about this place as it relates to what Hollywood could do here. So I quite literally have brought the Hollywood gates home. And that with Louis, who's our engineer,
Mm-hmm.
well, we're in a position that we weren't in before I came down here when we were already basically stacked. Now we have the opportunity to actually move this amazing mountain that we built ourselves forward. So I'll keep you updated. I'm also hoping to raise some awareness, what we've been pursuing collectively together that myself and others have been grinding on for months. This should put a big bright spotlight on the reality of what's been created.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very hopeful in God's plan because I know that a journey like this, granted it's connected everything else that it has in, couldn't have an end point that wasn't something absolutely big just based on what it's taken to get to this point.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for not giving up in that. I know we've had a couple moments because you're so passionate about Miss Maud as am I. That's what we literally connected over. But just thank you for being graceful and knowing that the not even pun intended big picture of all this was something that I know that you believed in. So I'm just very
Mm-hmm.
grateful, Mr. Long. Thank you.
Sure. My pleasure. It's good talking to you, Will.
You as well. Thanks for being so thorough and covering literally all the bases. I'm glad we finally got to get you some one-on-one time. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be in touch and I'm gonna get you the draft right now of the Canyon Country Everything deck. Um,
Okay.
Not finished. Will be done by Friday. I got to get to Oklahoma, set up some stuff with Danny Falcone, and then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
send you an overview of how I broke down the nonprofit studio side.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
All
Thank you,
right.
my friend.
Sounds good.
Appreciate you. Call me if you need anything.
You got it. Take
Bye,
care.
Bruce.
See ya.
Blessings.